Okay, I think folks are still coming in, but I see some names of folks I recognize. Welcome, everyone. I'm Davis Jenkins, Senior Research Scholar at the Community College Research Center. I'm joined today by my colleague Hannah Lahr of CCRC and Laura Williamson, who's Deputy Chancellor and President at San Jacinto College in Texas. We're going to talk about some findings from a long-term study we did on adoption of guided pathways practices and their effects on student outcomes with the 30 colleges that were involved in the AACC Pathways College. Hannah's going to give an overview of the findings, and then she'll talk with Laurel, and you can ask questions about how this played out at San Jacinto, and what the work going forward is. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. If you have any questions or comments or rebuttals, especially for me, just put them in the chat. So the AACC project, next slide, started in late 2015. And the idea was to try to pilot these, try to implement these theoretical ideas that were put out by Tom Bailey, myself and I, and others in the field, how to implement this idea of rethinking how community colleges are organized, not just to enhance access, but to help students get into and complete programs. It was a very much theoretical idea. We'd seen some work on this front in four-year institutions and to some extent in community colleges, but it was really a major undertaking. It's easy to talk about redesigning, but very difficult to do. And next slide. The main idea was that colleges, a lot of the reforms in colleges had focused on helping students prepare, get college ready through reforms of DevEd and better advising and other supports for students. But the idea was if we were really going to improve outcomes, we have to focus on helping students explore interests, get into a program, plan a program, and complete a program of study that's aligned with their career and further education aspirations. This isn't possible to do in the way that community colleges are organized now, and colleges have to redesign to figure out how to do this. And the kinds of changes that they have to make at scale are mapping their programs and aligning their programs to student end goals for careers and further education, helping students get on a path, including exploring interests and developing a plan, keeping students on plan, and very importantly, ensuring students are learning, not just in courses, but in programs. A big shift of the mindset in guided pathways is from success in courses to success in a program of study that's aligned with students' aspirations and goals. So it's not often that you get to spend several years working with a set of institutions that are crazy enough to go boldly where no college has gone before. And we really we at CCRC feel honored to have had these partners. We produced a lot of research on the costs of guided pathways, how colleges are managing these changes, and this one in particular, looking at what practices colleges implemented and what were the effects on early outcomes for students. So it's been a huge learning experience. These were hypotheses that we started out with very little precedent in the field, and we're indebted and really humbled by the awesome work that our partners did and what we in the field have learned from them. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hannah to give it just a big picture overview on what we found with this evaluation. Take it away, Hannah.
All right. Thank you, Davis. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today and talking about what we've learned from working with these 30 colleges over the last several years. All of this was very new to me when I started on this project. The idea of guided pathways was new, and I have just learned so much over the last several years. And like Davis said, it is unusual to be able to work with a set of colleges for so long. So feel like we were able to really learn so much and about the colleges and about what this model could look like. And as Davis mentioned earlier, like our understanding of guided pathways and what's possible has evolved since 2016 when this project started. So we continue to learn, and we're excited about next steps as well, which Davis is going to talk about it at the end of the webinar. All right, so I want to highlight today some findings from this evaluation of the AACC Pathways Project. The findings are summarized in 2 reports, which we released about a week or so ago. This first one, Innovating at Scale, this is the one I'm going to focus on sharing about today, but we released a companion brief that is really full of advice from the project leaders at the AACC Pathways Project. And when Laurel talks in a little bit, she's really going to talk about some of these issues of how do you start this work? How do you manage change over time? As we've learned, this takes 4 to 6 or even more years to implement these practices at scale and to really change an institution at scale. So how do you maintain that over time? And that report gets at this, and Laurel will highlight some more of this as we get into this webinar today. Here are the key questions that we asked as part of this evaluation. The first, what changes in practices are colleges making as part of guided pathways, and at what scale? Is adoption of guided pathways associated with improvements in student outcomes? And how can colleges approach guided pathways adoption? So those are the big questions. I'm going to focus on questions 1 and 2 to start with, and then we'll get into question 3 as we talk more with Laurel. So the outcomes that we focused on in this project and in this report are what we call early momentum metrics, or EMMs. These are 1-year metrics. They focus on credit accumulation in term 1 and in year 1. They focus on completing college level math and English in year 1 and persistence from term 1 to term 2. So in semester colleges, this is from fall to spring. The sample of students that we look at are what we call first time ever in college students. These are students with no prior college experience, so they aren't transferring in. And importantly, this cohort does not include former dual enrollment students, which, since we started this project, is a growing cohort of students at probably all of your colleges. But the outcomes that we're looking at do not include those students. We focused on this first time ever in college cohort for a couple of reasons, but the main one was that we were really interested in seeing whether changes in practice were associated with changes in outcomes. And the best way we thought to look at that was to look at students who had no prior college experience. So that's why we focused on this first time ever in college cohort. We examined these early momentum metrics for cohorts over several years, including several years prior to the start of the AACC Pathways Project. So we were able to look at change over time, about 8 years. Just a little background on the AACC Pathways Project. It included 30 colleges from 17 states. Colleges were invited to apply, and then they went through a pretty rigorous application and interview process to be selected for the project. Colleges sent teams of administrators, faculty members, advisors, classified staff, and other folks to intensive workshops in 2016 and 2017. During those workshops, the team looked at institutional data, they learned about the guided pathways model, and they started to develop implementation plans. And part of those implementation plans, we're also thinking about how can those of us at the Institute take these ideas and what we're learning back to our colleagues at the institution. So it's not just, the 8 or so people who are at the institutes, but really engaging the broader community in this process. CCRC collected data on the adoption of guided pathways practices, starting in the beginning of the project around 2016 through 2022. And then we looked at the changes in early momentum metrics from 2012 to 2020. So we had about 4 years prior to the start of the project and 4 years after the project ended. So when we think about adoption of guided pathways practices, there is a lot going on within the guided pathways framework. Davis mentioned the 4 pillars earlier. Within those pillars, there are many, many practices that are included. When we thought about the adoption of guided pathways practices and what we were looking for in colleges that had really fully scaled the model, we focused on these 7 practices. We focused on these because we think these are really essential to changing the student experience at institutions, with a focus on helping students explore, enter, and complete a program of study that's aligned with transfer and/or entry into the workforce. So we focused really on these 7 practices when we were thinking about what does it take to really fully scale this model. So here you can see we included things like organizing programs into meta majors, mapping all programs of study, including transfer and workforce programs. This include making course sequences and really laying out what are the requirements of every single program of study. We really wanted to provide an opportunity for all students to explore career and program options. And then really important is helping every student make a full program educational plan by the end of the first term. Students love to have educational plans. It gives them confidence that they are moving forward, that they have a path forward that is aligned with and is preparing them for their goals. Number 5 here on this list, replacing prereq remediation with co-req remediation for most students. We say most students because we do recognize that there are some students for whom a co-req approach might not work. But based on the research, we have found that the co-req model does work for the majority of students who are entering college. Alongside co-req is developing field-aligned math pathways, so determining which program, which math pathway is going to be the default for which program of study. And then implementing case management advising with advisors who are assigned to particular fields or meta majors. You might notice that not really included in this list is our practices from the 4th pillar, ensuring students are learning. The reason for that is because it is really difficult to measure changes in that 4th pillar at scale. And we really wanted to focus on seeing which colleges had implemented which practices at scale, really focusing on this integrated set of practices. So again, when we're thinking about scale, we're looking to see whether colleges had implemented all of these practices. So it's not in any way saying that that 4th pillar isn't important. And as Davis mentioned earlier, we probably think it's most important, but to measure change at scale, that is difficult. And so we focused on these 7 practices. So in looking at those 7 practices, we had adoption data from all 30 colleges, and then we wanted to see which colleges had really adopted this integrated set of practices. So what we found is that 11 colleges of the 30 had adopted all 7 of these guided pathways practices at scale, meaning for all students in all programs of study. 12 colleges were in the process of scaling guided pathways reforms. So that means that these colleges had done many of these practices, but not all of them were at scale. Some of them were still in progress. And then 6 colleges adopted some pathways practices, including some changes to advising and onboarding, but they had not been able to scale co-requisite math reforms. You'll notice this adds up to 29 colleges, not 30. There was one college that we did not include in this count because of other challenges at the institution. So findings on the changes in early momentum metrics. So if we look at the early momentum metrics again from 2012 through 2020, we saw that all colleges made improvements on the early momentum metrics. So that was really encouraging to see. when we looked at early momentum metrics kind of grouped by those three groups of colleges, so fully scaled, scaling in progress, or had not yet been able to scale co-requisite math, we found that the colleges that had made more progress scaling that integrated set of guided pathways reforms had made greater improvements on the early momentum metrics. And I'm going to show this in a second on some of these EMMs. When we disaggregate the early momentum metrics, we see improvements for all racial ethnic groups of students, but we saw that the equity gaps did not close. And in fact, you'll see that the lines tend to move somewhat in parallel over time. The one early momentum metric where we did not see improvements and in fact declined was on term-to-term persistence. So this is the fall to spring persistence. We think that this was largely due to COVID. The last year of data that we have from the colleges was from the 2020 cohort. So this is looking at persistence from fall 2020 to spring 2021. That was a very difficult year. And we think that that is largely the reason why we saw some declines when prior to that, the term-to-term persistence had held pretty steady. All right, so let's dig into a couple of these metrics. So first, I'm going to start with the completion of 12 or more college level credits in term one. And for all these graphs, what I'm showing is 3 trend lines. So for those 3 groups of colleges, so that you can start to see, how these trend lines differ by these 3 groups of colleges. So what we have here, again, this is the completion of 12 or more college level credits in term one. And what you can see here is we see some greater improvements for this fully scaled group of colleges. So for those 11 colleges that had fully scaled the model, we start to see that the trend line for these colleges increases at a higher, at a sharper slope than for the other 2 groups of colleges. So at the beginning of the project, all 3 groups were at about the same place prior, in 2012 or so, 15%, 18%. By the end of the project, you can see that for the fully scaled group, 33% of students were completing 12 or more college level credits in their first term compared to 24% for both the scaling and progress group and the strides made but struggling with math group. This is the completion of 24 or more college level credits in year one. This is an important metric because if students are completing 24 or more college level credits in their first year, then they're on track to complete an associate's degree in 3 years. So by the 3-year mark, students should be on track to complete that degree. And what we see here is sort of a similar pattern to what we saw when we thought about 12 or when we looked at the 12 or more college level credits group. So we see a greater increase for that fully scaled group of 11 colleges. And that's that teal line at the top. Completion of college level math is really important. This was a metric that we've talked about a lot as part of this project, is really strongly associated with work on developmental education reform. And what we see here are, again, a similar pattern. We see that the colleges that had fully scaled the model were increasing at a higher rate. But again, we do see increases for all of these groups over time. And then finally, I mentioned at the beginning, this was the one metric where we saw some declines over time. This is persistence from fall to spring. So this would be from fall 2020 to spring 2021. We see some declines here from the 2019 cohort to the 2020 cohort. Again, I put in the numbers here for 2019. And you can see that these numbers are very, very steady over time. Even going back to 2012 or so, they really hover around 75, 76%. But in all groups, even in that fully scaled group, it did decline in the 2020 cohort. And we think this is largely because this was a difficult year due to COVID. I mentioned earlier that we did see improvements for all student groups. Here you can see this is the disaggregated trends for the completion of 12 or more college credits. And this is just looking within that group of 11 colleges that had fully scaled the model. So zooming in here, what we see is that we see improvements for all groups. So for example, if we look at Black students, 8% of Black students in this group of 11 colleges were completing 12 or more credits back in 2012, and this increased to 21% in 2020. So an increase of 13 percentage points, which is promising. The top line is Asian students, and you can see an increase here from 30 to 43%, again, 13 percentage points. So these lines really are moving in parallel. But what we don't see if we look from back in 2012, in 2015, 16, when the project started, to 2020, is any closure in these gaps between these groups. So I want to give just a couple key takeaways here from our research and kind of what do we think this all means. So a couple highlights. One, these findings are really consistent with the big guided pathways idea that if we want to improve outcomes at scale, this requires college-wide changes in practice and really the adoption of this integrated set of practices at scale. So it can't just be some practices. It really has to be a set of practices that are really working together and adopted at scale for all students in all programs of study. Another important piece here is this focus on choosing, entering, planning, and completing a program of study. So guided pathways, while it is ultimately focused on completion, graduation, transfer, getting a job, we really want to ensure that students are helped to complete a program of study that's going to prepare them for those next steps, whether that's transfer with junior standing in a major or getting a job that pays a family sustaining wage. Third, whole college change is challenging. It takes at least 4 to 6 years. Laurel can talk more about this. 4 to 6 years might be on the shorter end, but it takes a long time. It requires consistent leadership and college-wide involvement. In the advice from the College Leaders Report, one of the things that we talk about was the consistent leadership at the presidential level and also among vice presidents in this group of 30 colleges. And we think that was really an important component of this work and why we were able to see so much progress in terms of adopting these practices over time. Finally, sustaining these reforms requires changes in mindset and really the adoption of a culture of continuous learning and continuous improvement. These practices, in order to be adopted at scale, in order to really be integrated and deeply embedded into a college, it requires people kind of thinking differently about how to help students into and through the college, and that provides a really strong foundation for this work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laurel Williamson. She is the Deputy Chancellor and President of San Jacinto College, which has been an Aspen finalist for many years and a great partner in this work. We send people to Laurel all the time when they have questions about how to actually do this work. So we're thrilled that she's here today, and she's gonna tell a story about how San Jacinto has taken on this work, and then we'll have a conversation after that. So Laurel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here to talk about pathways. And first I want to say that though pathways would indicate to you that it's all about mapping, mapping is only a small part of what you will be doing as you change an entire institution. And I will give you an example. When we started out with pathways, we went to the first meeting and the Associate Vice Chancellor of Student Services was with me. And we had just completed a 2-year process of redesigning student services from advising through the entire student journey. And after the first meeting, and we had read Redesigning America's Community Colleges, we talked about that at the meeting. We're walking back to our hotel room. We stopped and we looked at each other and said, you know what, we're going to have to redo that whole reorg. because we had to think differently about everything we did at the college. And so the mapping part, that was looking back, probably one of the easier parts. But it's difficult at first because it means change, and this means change. And I think you have to be honest with people about there are going to be losses and change, but I'm going to give you time to mourn those losses, but then we have to move on. And so I want to talk a little bit about the leadership that you will need to affect this. It is deep cultural change because it is thinking differently about how you serve students and putting students at the center of every conversation, no matter the area of the college you work in. So the first thing we did was we put out a call to the entire college to let us know if, as you've worked here over the years you've been here, and you've ever thought to yourself, how I could make this better for students. If we would only change this tiny thing, it would be better for students. And the reception we got and the suggestions we got were just enormous. One of the things our cashiers told us was that when students come to pay their tuition at the cashier, then we tell them about the fees that are on top of tuition. And the student says, well, I don't have that money. I don't have that extra $200. And maybe that means that I don't go to school. And so we then eliminated fees and rolled everything into tuition. And so when we say to a student, this is tuition, this is what it costs to go to San Jacinto College, that's it when they get to the cashier. So think about the messages and the way you communicate with students. Our whole advising system changed. We are very focused at the front end of advising on establishing a pathway. It has reduced our general studies remarkably because we don't let students not make decisions. They don't have resources and a context to make decisions. That's our job to help them. So what do you need? Do you need a job in 30 days? Do you need an associate degree? Are you wanting to transfer? What's the career that you think you're after? And then talking with them about that career. When we did our mapping, we looked at our programs, transfer and technical programs. And if you were a technical program, you had to answer these 3 questions. Are there entry-level jobs available in our region? Is a certificate or a degree required? And if you get that entry-level job, will it be at family sustaining wages? If the answers to any of those questions were no, then we began to take a look at what we were doing. We eliminated some certificates that did not lead to jobs in our region. We eliminated some programs that did not lead to family sustaining wages. But sometimes when you do that deep dive, you find that there are things that you can change about a program to make that program viable. On our transfer side, the question was, does this degree or does this pathway lead to a transfer program at a university within our region? And does the student arrive at junior status with no loss of credit? Again, if the answers were no, then we had to make some changes. So in terms of the leadership and you need to have a directive and inclusive leadership. And that sometimes is a difficult balance. So what do I mean by that? You need to be directive about the goals. And when you establish your goals, leverage your data. You need to be looking at data disaggregated in every way you can think of. What does a student who's lower socioeconomic, what does a student from a particular high school, how do they do at our college? Let the data guide you to where you have your problems and set your goals to correct those problems, to address those student barriers. That's the first thing. So be inclusive about finding ways to address those goals. Be directive about the goals, but inclusive in ways to achieve the goals. Be directive in terms of what must be examined and what must change. But be inclusive in pulling people in to help you identify how you will make those changes, what you need to make those changes, what the resources are that your college needs to focus on. Be directive in the decisions that must be made, but again, be inclusive in gathering input on which to base those decisions. I can't emphasize data as leverage enough. One of the things that we did is that we make sure that all employees have access to data that affects their work. Faculty have faculty portfolios that include all of their student metric data, and they look at those after every term. And then they are conversations with their department chairs and their deans about where they see barriers, where they need to improve. And that's how you get to the teaching and learning enterprise. Where are students not making it through? And it's not about you're doing a bad job. It's about, let me find professional development. Let me find resources to help you improve that student performance, to help our students get through. We went to 100% co-requisites in our math pathways and in our English, and that has been very successful. Students are achieving, as the data showed, they are achieving the Gateway Math and English in their first semesters, certainly in the first year. And if they are not, then again, we have wraparound services. What do you need and how can the institution support you? I sometimes kid people about our data. We are, again, very data informed. And I almost can tell you who had on a blue shirt when it was raining at noon on Tuesday and what classes they were in and how were they doing. So that's how well you need to know your students. And become results oriented, not only operations oriented. And then the question, has it been worth it? Because it has been hard work. Yes, we reduced, for example, our when we first started in Pathways, students were on average amassing 94 credit hours toward a 60 credit hour associate degree. What is wrong with this picture? And so now it's 74 hours. So it has been successful in reducing those hours, getting students through more completely and ready for their career or ready for transfer. Our general studies, as I said, we have reduced the number of students in general studies. And at 15 hours, if you still are in general studies, you have a mandatory advising appointment to talk about getting a career path or a transfer path. We've had increases in all of our student performance metrics, A to C success, course retention, completion, attainment of college level math and English. We've shortened time through developmental education. When we went to co-requisites, we eliminated 5 courses in integrated reading and writing to 2 or 1, and we eliminated 3 developmental education math classes to 1. We have higher engagement of our faculty across the board, full-time and part-time. Do not forget your part-time faculty. For us, they deliver a huge amount of our instruction. They need to know what the goals are as well and need to be engaged and committed. And then professional development for leaders. One of the things this prompted us to do was a complete reorganization of our department chair and dean levels. Those are critical leaders at your institution. Don't forget about the professional development and the support they need in order to carry out the work that achieves these goals. And so now it's time for us, I'm talking about what's next. We are looking very deeply in credit to non-credit alignment. We have lots of work to do there. We also realize that we're still in the same organizational structure as we were when we started in 2016. I anticipate some changes in how my leadership at the dean level is structured going forward. So again, let your data guide you and then design your strategies to address and respond to the goals that you've identified through all of that work and analysis. So I think we're ready to go to questions and turn it back over to Davis.
Yeah, thank you, Laurel. A couple questions from the chat I wanted to pose to you. One was any advice you have on how do you bring people along to really engage with the data when that can be a bit challenging?
Well, it is challenging, but here's the thing. When you collect your data, and you will see where you need to be working, you have to put that in front of the people involved in doing that work. And so when we looked at our math data, for example, students were not getting through developmental math or English. In fact, when we first, about 2 years into achieving the dream, if you came into San Jacinto College and you tested at the lowest level of math and English in both areas, we had 0 students making it through the first semester. Nobody can argue that that's a problem. So when you put that data in front of people and you say, how do we address this? And to faculty, you are the people in the classroom with our students. You have to help me with this. We put together a math R&D team, and I spoke to them and said, you're the smartest people I have here in math instruction. If you can't figure this out, we are lost and our students are lost. Help us. And they did an incredibly great job of creating those co-requisite bonds that are very successful today. So again, leverage your data, make sure people understand it, and they have an opportunity to see it and think about it.
Laurel, when we visited recently, we noticed that you have these, you mentioned them, the faculty data, where what's in that they look at? It's performance of students disaggregated in all their courses and compared to what? Like the other averages? Yeah, go ahead.
Compared, and it with no names. I mean, it just has that faculty member, right? But it compares that faculty member by course with everyone teaching that course in that faculty member's department and then institution-wide. So you can see how things are going. And then we ask questions. Would you like us to pair you with a faculty member who's having more success and talking about what strategies that person is using? Do you have some professional development? How would you like to go about bringing these metrics up to a standard performance? Now, we're not giving you a mark to hit, but what we're saying is your student metrics are not where they need to be.
Another question we had was about how do you move from kind of the traditional academic divisions or departments model to more of a meta major model? Like, do you keep both? How do you help people understand the relationship between these things? How did you approach that?
Well, we did group our programs into meta majors. And one of the things in Texas is that when a student goes from the 8th grade to the 9th grade, they have to pick what they call an endorsement. And those are meta majors, essentially. We aligned the high school endorsements to our meta majors, to our programs, and then to the meta majors, so that a student coming in can see, you don't have to stick with that endorsement in high school, but you can clearly see where the program leads in terms of that meta major and what that pathway is. And again, all of that is related on the website and in our conversations with students to careers. Where is that taking you in terms of a job? Or where is that taking you in terms of a transfer? So again, you have to have all that alignment, get some great visuals so people understand it and can see it, and that when faculty and advisors talk to students, they have that resource available to say, here's where you're going, here's what's available.
Yeah, my take on that question too is that one way to think about it is that meta majors are kind of from like something for the students, from the students' perspective. Academic divisions, departments can stay as is, faculty still belong to a department, but the meta majors are a way to help students think about programs and careers. Does that sound?
Business, yes, business covers accounting, both transfer and technical. Although we have questions about the technical path there, it covers entrepreneurship, it covers business management. I mean, there are lots of things in a meta major, so it doesn't change the program underneath that. It changes how you talk about it and how you communicate with students.
Can you talk about how you've applied guided pathways practices to your work with dual enrollment students?
When a student is dual enrollment, we again treat them as we do all students, which is we have them pick a pathway. We do not let them take random dual credit courses, and we have the degree plan. We have their map, and so they get on that map, and we say, this is the first term, and if you can only take one course, this is the first course, here's the second course. And so again, like all students, they are on a delineated plan with a goal in mind, whether that's a career and technical goal or whether that's a transfer goal. And we map to a specific institution. So the student can say to us, I want to go into business at the University of Houston, Clear Lake. We have the map through the bachelor's degree. We don't stop at the associate degree.
Can you talk about how you have sought at the college to close gaps by race and other factors?
We have had some programs to support underrepresented or lower socioeconomic students who arrive at that status. We have created in the past 2 years a complete student services division called Student Support Services. And that includes, we have a special coordinator for neurodiverse students. We have mental health services. We have travel vouchers. We have referrals to community organizations that can help with transportation. We have food markets on each location. So we are trying to, again, put all the support in place that students need. And then we also 2 years ago opened our Promise program so that any graduating senior in our taxing district, high school senior, can go to San Jacinto tuition free. So again, we are trying everything to make sure that we serve our community well and that we are getting our economic mobility for our students and their families and putting them in family sustaining wage jobs.
Have you, in looking at your data and disaggregating these data, have you seen improvements in that over time?
We have, and what we have seen is that all boats rise, as your data indicated. We've done some closing the gap between white students and Hispanic students, in part because our Hispanic population has grown so dramatically. But we have seen all boats rise, and rise significantly and rise together. But again, we do have Hispanic students who are outperforming all other groups of students. So we have closed some gaps in terms of where we started.
So what is some advice that you would give folks on this webinar about how to really take their pathways work to the next level? Like, assuming, people have done, some of the initial steps, like what is like a good big bet for people? What advice would you give?
Well, again, I think that you have to engage the entire college. One of the things we did right at the first of Pathways was, and I'm sure Davis loves me for this very much, we bought a copy of Redesigning America's Community College for every college employee. And we asked that they read it. And we then had book discussions for 2 years. And the reason that it moved was because we didn't want to have the traditional book discussion where you read a book and you get in a room and you say a lot of things. We actually trained facilitators with guided questions about the content of the book, and we chunked it out. So the first semester, we only looked at the first 3 chapters. And the second semester, we looked at the next 3, and so on. And we really had deep conversations and lots of arguments about what this means or what the implications are for us. But I'm telling you, when you read that book and you recognize yourself in there, it is a wake-up call. And we as a college, I'm not going to say we didn't have a few outliers, but as a college, we experienced that wake-up call together and knew this is what you need to reinforce. We knew that we could be better for our students, that we could make changes to what we did and how we did for the benefit of students. Keep students at the center of all decisions.
We had another question just come in the chat that I think is, this would be a question for you as well. The question of what does reorganization actually look like? You mentioned reorganization a couple times. Like, what are some of the big consequential changes that you made?
You mentioned
One of
the chair redesign, but I think,
Mhm.
you know, what was the philosophy there? I think was important to stress.
Um, when we started, we had very traditional chair structure. Chairs were elected for 2 years, and really what they did was a great deal of clerical. You know, they handled the schedule, the input for the schedule, doing the faculty loads, talking with students who had some issue or like that. The chair level, I think what we realize is overlooked as a pivotal leadership level within the institution. And our chairs also taught, right? So you're a chair, you've got 5 classes, you've got all this departmental stuff to do. What wasn't happening for us was support and leadership for the faculty. So our chairs teach 1 course a year, and that is in the summer. And the rest of the time, they are dedicated to the leadership and the support of the faculty within their departments. And we spent a good deal of time and resources on bringing them into a leadership capacity, because they didn't have any leadership training. Again, they were doing clerical and data input work. So now our chairs are leaders, and we have a 3-day department chair and dean academy every summer, where we go over and talk about how did this year go, the past year, what was achieved, where do we still need to work, and then we set the agenda for the coming year, and we talk about it as a group. It's a huge group. I've got 9 instructional deans and about 44 chairs, and then significant leader positions are there as well. And then we also talk with them at that time about changes. What are some of the changes that we made, and how you communicate that to faculty when they get back? And then we script the division and department meetings for what we call our College Community Week, which is the week that faculty come back before classes start. And so that we know we have consistency in understanding and outlook, and consistency in goals and the thinking around goals. And that consistency means that we can drive this huge ship that is San Jacinto College together in one direction, rather than having it run amok and nobody knows what anybody else is doing. It's bringing that consistency to your communication, to your goals, to your leadership training, so that we all understand what we're trying to achieve.
One other question that I was thinking of asking, and then it came in the chat, so I'll pose it to you here. A question about tutoring, and whether any changes to tutoring, academic support services, and I'll throw in advising within the meta major structure.
Well, we have gone, we've just instituted now. I'm just gonna, you know, as Hannah said earlier, COVID threw a wrench in many things, and it slowed us down in getting to the specialized advising, but we are there now. And so our advisors are attached to a program. And so if you're advising our students that are in, say, instrumentation, non-destructive testing, petrochemical programs, you as an advisor know everything about that program. You work directly with the faculty and with industry leaders to understand the jobs, what's needed, what you can say to your students in terms of advising, so you can describe what those jobs are like, what the money is, and so on and so forth. So we've gone to that specialized advising there. I forgot what the first part was. What did we do differently?
Any other changes in like
tutoring
or other student supports?
Yes, we have tutoring centers on each of our campuses, and we encourage faculty. Faculty have an obligation to do college service. It's 15% of what they do, and we encourage them to become tutors, right, to do their college service in our tutoring center. And then we train our tutors. We have peer tutors. We have online tutoring. And clearly, you know, the areas where you need to have the tutors is math, your writing courses, and sciences. That's where we get the most demand, but you need to have those resources. And here's another thing we ask faculty: don't just tell the student to go to tutoring. Do 2 things. walk them to the tutoring center. Second thing is make it part of their homework. So it's not just, I hope you go to the tutoring center. No, this is part of what you are going to do as your class assignment.
And tutoring, where does tutoring fall in your institution? Like what department or division is it in?
We have student success centers, and they are located in the libraries, and they have a director, and that person coordinates tutoring services.
Got it. Okay. Wow, there's a bunch more questions coming in here. We will keep everyone's questions just so you know, and if you have any other questions, feel free to email us. We'll share our emails at the end, and we'll try to respond to some of these. One question here that I think is a common question we get that I'll just give to you quickly, Laurel, before we wrap up, is the question of including and giving students the opportunity to still explore and include electives in a more prescribed pathway. Can you talk a little bit about that and how the college is still, providing students with that opportunity?
Well, students have electives and they have choices, but I think that if you would talk to students about what they want to do, it has to do with time to degree and time on task. I don't think they would tell you, I want to take a lot of personal interest courses and not get to my degree. So I think you need to think more from the student's perspective in terms of that question than you do with what may have been your experience when you went through school or what you might like to do. If I went back to college, gosh, I could think of all the courses I'd love to take, right? But what we do say to students is, on these electives that you have, this pathway map is going to tell you what, if you're transfer, what the transfer institution wants you to have and what they're saying to their native students about elective choices. So you can choose outside of that, but no, you're probably going to have to take another elective and add to that time to degree, work on transfer. There's not a great deal of room for electives in the technical pathways because it's only 15 credits of general education there. Again, you have some choices, but think about what supports this degree pathway best.
Thank you, Laurel. I want to thank you so much just for everything you've done, for everything you've taught me over the last several years, and for sharing your wisdom today on this webinar. I'm going to turn it back over to Davis
And for
to wrap
buying
up.
the books, all those books, man.
Thank you so much, Laurel. Everyone, if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat. We will try to respond to you and send some answers to your questions after the webinar as well.
Jeffrey Thomas says, I think the importance of strong leadership and institutional goals can't be overstated. And I think you saw an example there.
Yes.
So we talked about the fact that we're seeing improvements in all student groups, but not closing the gaps. And we've seen, especially in retention, some downward trends following COVID. So the question is now, what do we do as next frontiers in guided pathways to increase even further success by students and close equity gaps? And that's the focus of the next frontiers of guided pathways. In the next slide, initially, as Laurel said from the start, there was a lot of focus on mapping programs and pathways and organizing them, and that's really important, providing students with information about them and improving advising for students into and through programs. Really important work. Next slide, next section. But there are a number of areas that really need further work, especially if we're going to address equity. The first is ensuring that our programs enable students, essentially our programs are worth completing. Do they enable students to secure living wage jobs that have opportunities for advancement and transfer, as Laura was saying, in junior standing in a major, not transfer with 90 credits and starting as a first-term sophomore? So we're doing a lot of work, and Laurel mentioned program alignment, not just credit programs, but non-credit programs, tying the programs, aligning the programs with job ladders that you work with your employer partners to develop. Curriculum alignment is important, but just as important, you can have great, well-aligned programs, but the teaching and learning need to be aligned and rich, and especially strong focus on helping students communicate orally and in writing. I need some oral communication help here. Critical thinking. These are the most valued skills, even more than technical skills, looked for by employers. So teaching, especially in foundation courses for programs, and expanding opportunities for experiential learning for students is got to be a big focus for improving students' outcomes generally and equity. People talked about, there were some questions about ELL students and others. We've really got to customize the onboarding process to particular groups. Returning adults too often don't get help. Laurel mentioned dual enrollment students. We looked at the work they're doing and applying guided pathways to their dual enrollment offerings. And they're going not just to suburban schools or to students and families that are already going to go to college, but to some of the poorest schools in their areas, and having great success customizing onboarding into the college out of college. And scheduling is really a next frontier. You can have great courses, well taught, but if they're not scheduled and offered through media affordable that accommodates working adults. And if we don't pay attention to, and I'm glad Laurel mentioned it, time to completion, we're really not going to succeed in improving outcomes. Scheduling is an equity issue. I love community colleges, but too often we roll over schedules that were started back in the 70s. The deans and chairs don't coordinate and end up hurting themselves. We cancel classes. We need to get beyond that and schedule courses based on students' plans, and have students provide information on when they can take courses and what media they take. We're seeing colleges doing this that are increasing FTE and therefore increasing revenue, even when headcount enrollment is going down. So these areas are the next frontiers that we're seeing in places like San Jacinto and other colleges that were early adopters. And they're also the focus of our work, because we think they're really the next frontier based on what we've learned in further improving community college student outcomes and closing equity gaps. With that, Hannah, any other
No, thank you
comments?
so much. No, thank you again. Thank you to Laurel. Thank you to everyone who joined today, and for your questions. Our emails are all here. Please feel free to reach out to us. We love getting questions, or as Davis said, rebuttals, comments, whatever it is. We like to hear from people and to hear about what you're working on and what you're thinking. So please feel free to reach out. Check out our reports. Davis also put the link to the new dual enrollment reports in the chat, so check those out as well. And thank you so much. We appreciate it.
We will send out a recording of the presentation.
Yes, it'll be posted on the website, and we will email it out in a couple days. All right, thanks everyone.